Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Get ready to be inspired, hear success stories, and learn tips and principles for bringing out the best in everyone.
Hello, everyone. This is Debra, and you're watching Human Potential at Work. I am the CEO of RU Global, and we are strategists and market influencers for the community of people with disabilities in the aging market. I apologize that we're starting late today, and I'm also going to apologize that for some reason Zoom and Facebook are not allowing us to live caption. So we do have a captioner, Kim, in the background, and she's going to caption it all, and then we will get the video, we'll match it to the video and get it out there. But live captioning, for some reason, is not behaving today, so we apologize for that. So we're going to go ahead and start the program. I really want to welcome our guest today, Dr. Shoshana, I'm going to say it right, Ungerleider. I did put a little note on my board because I wanted to make sure I said that your name properly. Shoshana is the executive producer of the show that's on Netflix right now that if you haven't seen it, you got to see it. It's called Endgame. And it's really talking about, in my words, I believe, the dignity of death. So Shoshana, thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we, as we start, we want to talk about who you are, but I heard that congratulations are in order. You just got back from Japan on your honeymoon. So I hope that you'll tell us a little bit about that too.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it was actually a bit of a belated honeymoon. We got married back in October of 2016. And then my husband and I have just been so busy that we didn't put it together until the end of April. So we went to Japan and had just an amazing trip. It's just such a beautiful country and amazing people. We ate our way through the country.
Great. It is a great country. And it's interesting too about Japan, because Japan, of all of the countries, is the country that's aging the fastest. So this topic is very, very relevant to Japan and other countries. So, so tell us about who you are and how did you get involved as an executive producer of this amazing film, Endgame?
Well, I'm a physician, so I'm trained in internal medicine and I practice in a hospital setting. So I'm called a hospitalist, meaning I take care of people only when they're admitted to the hospital, not primary care. And I'm also a philanthropist, and I call myself a palliative care activist. And palliative care, for those who maybe haven't heard of it, is a pretty new field of medicine, and it uses an interdisciplinary team-based approach to take care of patients and their families who are facing a serious illness or a life-limiting illness, with the focus on quality of life. So I see them as an extra layer of support for patients and families, who are going through a very difficult time. It can be used at any time during the course of illness, so specifically not just at the end of life. I think that's a really important distinction, and ideally months or even years upstream from what we would consider the end to be. So I'm happy to, I think it's important to talk about sort of why I got interested in this. Yes. I'm actually not a palliative care doctor. I'm a generalist, but I focus the majority of my non-clinical work on really palliative care activism, medical education, and real public education around this topic about ending well. Really early on in my training, I thought I wanted to be a cardiologist. So I loved pathophysiology, meaning understanding disease and figuring out ways that we can solve cardiac problems using procedures and medication. And it wasn't until the first year of my intern year of residency, where I was spending months and months training in the ICU, and I realized that really far too often people aren't dying in ways that match the goals and the values of how they've lived their lives. And
I agree.
Yeah, and my goal as a physician is to make sure that the care people get is care that they truly want and that they understand as much as possible. And it turns out that much of the time, people who are in the hospital don't really know what's going on. whether it's, the treatment plan for the day or the prognosis down the road or the illness trajectory, patients and families are really often in the dark. And I think a big part of that is that as physicians, we don't take the time to truly talk to our patients. Some do, but for the majority, it's for many reasons we don't. Turns out that 70% of doctors haven't been trained to have difficult conversations with their patients. We know that from a big study back in 2016. But we're also not incentivized in medicine to communicate either. So we're paid, really, this, most people know this, we're paid to do things to people, to do surgery, to do procedures.
Right.
That's how
to save our lives. It's all about saving our lives, save our lives, no matter what, even if it impacts the quality of the life. Mm-hmm. And I agree. I think the doctors are incentivized. Everything that's happening are making these things worse. And also on top of it, and I know you can talk about this because you're learning more about this, but there's such stigma associated with dying. I remember when my husband's mother was dying, my mother, and she stopped eating. And my mother said, you need to go there and you need to force her to eat. And you need to, and somebody from hospice said, the body knows how to die. And so we need to, I think, do a better job of honoring this process. And I'm not, saying let's all commit suicide. I'm just saying that dying is part of living. And so I have been a fan of one of the doctors that you had on the show, Dr. BJ Miller. I'm a huge fan of his work.
Me too.
And such a huge fan. And when I saw Netflix, I'm a huge fan of Netflix too. And Netflix actually, I guess based on my viewing, presented the show to me and said, this might be something you'd be interested in. And I watched it and it touched me to my core. It is one of the most powerful films I've ever seen. It is a beautiful film and it's talking about a really hard subject. It really gets into lives of real patients that have at this point passed on. And I think it's talking about topics that we must talk about. And we've got to break down these stigmas and these barriers and how we treat people with, chronic illness. And it really touched me. So and I went out on Twitter and I was saying how much I loved the movie and you thanked me. And I was like, oh, we would love to have you on the show. So thank you so much. Yes. Thank you so much for, first of all, engaging back with me because some people don't. And I just think this work is so, so important. And so let me ask you first, and why, what do you think we can do about the culture? Why we're so afraid of death in our cultures? Mm-hmm. And I think we're so afraid sometimes and I'm old enough in my life that I have, watched multiple people die, including one of the hardest for me was one of my best friend's son at 7 years old died. And the doctors, they did everything. They were heroic and they did everything. We were able to keep this young man alive for 3 months. But what we did to him almost might be considered torturous. And after he passed, his mother was crying and she said, oh, I shouldn't have let him do blah, 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 blah. And I said, listen, when your 7-year-old's in trouble, you will throw yourself in front of a bus to save him. Mm-hmm. So I think of the empathy that you must have for the families. And like you said, it's sometimes the patients don't know what's going on. And to make it worse, if you have patients that have disabilities that cause them to communicate in a different way, maybe they're deaf and they speak a different language, or, they're like Rosemary, one of our chief accessibility officer, Rosemary can't speak and she can hear, but she communicates with assistive technology. Mm-hmm. So that makes it even worse for everybody, including the doctors and the nurses and the patient and the families.
Absolutely. I think by design, the work that I'm doing both clinically and with the nonprofit is to create a truly human-centered end-of-life experience that's all about inclusion and accessibility, right? In every sense. And I think that making sure that everyone has an end-of-life experience that's in line with their goals and their values is so important. And and I think it's important to point out that our current system is essentially a conveyor belt, right?
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
So by default, no matter how old you are, no matter how sick you are, you will receive aggressive, invasive care, right? And for some people, that makes great sense. If you are, in your 20s and get hit by a car, gosh, I hope people will try to save you. But that's not always the same situation when somebody is older in age, has multiple chronic medical problems, or maybe has an underlying serious medical illness for which aggressive invasive care may not actually be what they want, right? So I think, when it comes down to it, we should be tailoring to the individual based on what they want and what matters most to them. So I think that starts with the same question, what matters most to you, but ends in a different outcome for everybody. And that is something we really haven't wrapped our heads around in medicine. There isn't a one right way to do this.
I agree. And I think also we haven't wrapped our heads around it as families, because my father-in-law, who passed away 2 years ago, was also a medical doctor. And he worked in nursing homes and hospitals his whole life. And he was very clear to us about what he wanted to happen at his end of life. He was ridiculously clear about it. We had 15 different, written orders of what we were and were not allowed to do. And when my precious father-in-law was dying, my husband and I were in there, and I imagine it appeared to him, being in and out of it, because he had a brain tumor at that point and he was hallucinating, that I believe, because of the agitation he was experiencing, that he did not believe we were going to follow out his orders. And so at one point because I didn't know what to do with myself, and I was putting lotion on his arms and he grabbed my arm and he said, "Go to bed, Debra, go to bed." And I thought, okay, and then he looked at my husband and he said, "Do as I told you." And I thought, he's making very clear to us. He told us what he wanted us to do. And we were actually in the process of getting him to hospice so he could have so we did do what he told us to do, but how he was trying to communicate with us at that point, if we hadn't have had so much information beforehand, we would have not been able to interpret it. So I think it's on the families, and also the physicians and all of the medical personnel trying to help us have quality of life. I think it's such a critical topic. I really do. So Shoshana, but you have a nonprofit. Do you tell us about your nonprofit and what you're doing, and how you went from being, an emergency hospital doctor to being in this kind of, this is a powerful conversation here, full of stigmas.
Yeah, well, I still practice medicine. I work part-time at night so that I get lots and lots of days off, which is really nice. And I started a foundation that supports an annual symposium, so an annual gathering, but also a media platform. And we're really the first of its kind place where patients and caregivers are on the same stage with doctors, with nurses, with policymakers, with insurers, where everybody has a voice, because this is about being human. Ending well is not a medical issue. It's just not. It's not a policy issue. It's part of it, but it's truly a human one, right?
Yes.
Yes. And for some out there, that this makes perfect sense what I'm saying. And for others, we're really there to challenge the status quo of how we think about healthcare and care otherwise, to truly invite everyone to the table and together impact care through new systems, new products, policy, maybe services that are widely inclusive and keep the person at the center of care. I'm so committed to that. And I think right now is the time to really do that. Our symposium every year is in December. So this year it's December 6th in San Francisco. And we have 600 people coming in from all over the world. And it's going to be an amazing day. It's a TED style event. So really short, highly curated presentations. Turns out tickets are almost sold out. And we have amazing speakers who come from every walk of life. people who you wouldn't necessarily think would be an expert on this topic, or they aren't an expert, but they've had a personal story. So they're an expert in being a human being, right? For example, Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, he's a venture capitalist. He was the founding president of Google China. He's a guy who's all about tech all over the place. 5 years ago, he got lymphoma, and now talks about the fact that we need to, of course, continue to improve technology, but we can't lose the human side of caring.
I agree.
Or somebody
and we have,
yeah,
unfortunately, many times.
We absolutely have. So yeah, we have an amazing lineup. Justin Baldoni, who's an actor, a director, and a filmmaker, does the CW TV series Jane the Virgin.
I love that.
In his free time, he cares a lot about young people with serious illness and telling their stories. So he's gonna get up on stage and talk about why that's important to him. So
I love it. I love it.
Change
agents. Before we leave this topic, tell us what the name of your foundation is. And also what we want to do is we want to make sure that everybody has a link to the conference. Even if they can't go this year, maybe they can go. This is a movement. This is a movement. And I hope many of us will join Shoshana in this movement, because I don't think anything's more important, and it is truly about being human. So tell us the name of your foundation and maybe the website for the foundation too.
Sure. The name of the foundation is Endwell Foundation, and we're a 501c3 nonprofit. The website is endwellproject.org, and you can find us on Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, you name it. So we're there.
Good. And I will join you out there turning up the volume of it. So let's dig into the film a little bit, because this is a film about death. So it's got to be very depressing and sad. Well, no, it touched me. It touched me so much. I loved it. I loved it so much that after I finished it, I got up and I went and got my husband. And I said, okay, come on, we're going to watch this. Mm-hmm. And we watched it together. Again, I lost my mother the last day of the year last year. So I've had experiences with death, and I have a friend of mine that's walking. He's definitely at the end of his life, and he's had multiple organs cut out, and the cancer keeps coming back, and it came back again, and they're like, well, we're gonna, and I said, wow, why don't you watch this movie Endgame? And he's trying to get ready now, get his life in order. And I don't know why I would consider you brave for this topic, but it is a taboo topic. And so tell us how you got involved and more about the film, and also Netflix. I think it's amazing that Netflix has made a priority to this. God bless them.
Agreed. Yeah. So it was actually by accident that I got involved in film. So this is actually the second film that I helped to support. The first one is called Extremis, and you'll love this if you haven't seen it. It's about end-of-life decision-making, specifically in the ICU. So it was filmed in Oakland, California. And one of my close personal friends, Dr. Jessica Zitter, who's a palliative care and ICU doc, reached out to a filmmaker friend of hers and said, hey, come shoot in my ICU. And they put together an incredible film that happened to be the very first short documentary that Netflix ever bought. We got very lucky in that they decided to be in the business of short docs back in 2016. And we actually were nominated for an Academy Award and 2 Emmys for that film.
Wow. I can't wait to see it. And we'll put the name of it in the, we'll make sure we put that in Facebook and also on the website so people can find it.
Wonderful. And then, through my work, being a board member at Zen Hospice Project and knowing BJ Miller, as a friend and colleague in San Francisco, I heard about Endgame, and our 2 directors, Rob Epstein and Jeffrey Friedman, are longtime documentarians. They're based here in San Francisco. They've won multiple Academy Awards. And when I heard they were doing a project about this topic that I care so much about, I said, gosh, how can I be a part of it and support it? And, again, it was really by chance that, I was in the right place at the right time and said, hey, I'm really committed to film as a way to tell a story for people to really look behind the curtain of what it's like to be sick. as a patient, as a family member, maybe even as a healthcare provider. And I think documentary film does such a great job of showing some of these incredibly intimate moments, getting right in there, as you saw with Endgame and you'll see with Extremis, showing these critical conversations, right, that have to take place in order to make sure that the care people get is care that they want and they understand. And I know I say that a lot, but that's truly what it's about. And we also want to show, though, that there isn't one right way to live well until the very end. There's such a wide range of goals and personal values out there. Our job is to respect that diversity and work with patients and families to achieve the best possible days for as long as they have left.
I agree. And I remember when I was watching the film, the film tells a couple of different stories, and the loved ones responding to their loved one that was going to die. It was just very interesting. I remember there's a story in there about a family and the husband of the wife that's dying and the mother, and them trying to wrap their head around it, and the woman who's dying, but her husband has definitely not accepted it yet. And so if we wait until then to have these conversations, we're emotional and we don't want to let go. And I miss my mother, all those things. And then of course the doctors and the medical personnel are trying to read between the lines and understand, and it's a very complicated process, and we're not talking about it enough, which is why I was so delighted to find the film. And I would imagine the reason why all of this found you is because you do have a heart for it and you want to make a difference, and you are. And so I don't think there were any accidents why it found you and why we found each other, because people need to watch these movies. This is how we learn as society. We learn by our documentaries. And I think that I was reading an article, I can't remember the gentleman, and he was a doctor and his father was dying of cancer. And he had talked about they've done all these radical things to save his father. And towards the end of his father's life, he realized that maybe in his zest to save his father's life, he was actually really impacting the quality of his father's life that was left. And he actually felt grief and sadness about the way he had handled it towards the end, because, and so I think this palliative, understanding what that means and the dignity, and it's a beautiful movie about a hard topic.
Thank you. Yeah, and we're so lucky to have, a distributor like Netflix. So with the potential for tens of millions, maybe even more, to see the film. I think, the way now that media is consumed through streaming, through social media, through my work with film and through our work with the Endwell Foundation, creating content that's accessible to people in a way that is story-based, but is, really evidence-based and helps people to take their conversations to the next level. And I think, with the film specifically, I want to empower people to have a say in their care, especially in the moments when it matters most. And you did point out that it's nearly impossible to make a thoughtful decision about end of life in an acute crisis, right? Which is why we feel like upstream education for patients, for families, for doctors, right? And having these conversations early and often is critical. I think we see, for the most part, doctors aren't great at doing this. So I actually would encourage people out there to bring it up. Talk to your family. If you're dealing with a serious or life-limiting illness, ask your doctor about palliative care if they haven't brought it up. Because who wouldn't want an extra layer of support, for them, for the family when they're facing something really hard. And I also want to point out the film team for Endgame did an incredible job of creating a curriculum that's available on our film website that's tailored for several people, providers of healthcare, community, patients, and really dives into how to best use the film. So for personal education, but also if you wanted to put on like a community screening to further this conversation. So it's fantastic, and on the Endgame website.
And buy a copy for your doctor. Buy a copy for everybody in your family.
Oh, it's free. It's all free.
Well, that's
It's
true.
out there.
That's
It's
true.
out there.
That's true. I know.
Curriculum is free.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Another thing I liked so much about the film, and I was already a fan of Dr. B.J. Miller's because I saw him on Oprah's Super Soul Sunday, and just think he's amazing. He's just an amazing man. So, but I thought it was interesting how in the film you looked at several scenarios. So there was scenarios where the patient was dying in the hospital, and there were and I still don't know enough about palliative care, but there was another one where, if I'm saying this right, Shoshana, it was like a hospice center. Do you mind just talking about a few of those scenarios? Because I was not familiar until I saw Dr. Miller on Oprah. I wasn't familiar with work like that. And I was so touched by his story and about his work, his life's work.
Sure. I think on purpose, we wanted to show various trajectories and highlight, you can have an amazing end of life experience in a hospital setting. That's possible. You can also be home if that's a possibility for you and if that's what you want. And then a place like Zen Hospice Project, which is a facility that provides hospice care in a home-like setting and uses sort of the Zen mindset of mindful caregiving to care for people up until the end, focusing a lot on aesthetics. So how does food and the senses support people through until the end of life? And I think that it's really important that we recognize that there isn't one right way. I think what's right for one person may not be a fit for somebody else in terms of spending their last days, weeks, months of life. And, I think a lot of us get in our head like, well, everyone should die at home. That's the right way to do it. Right. And that's not true, right? For some people, they don't want to be at home. For others, maybe they want to be at home, but it's logistically not possible. So our job, in the field of hospice and palliative care is to really do our very best to create or give people that experience that works for them. So that's a lot of what the conversations you saw in the film with our social worker, with the physicians, with the chaplain. It takes a real team to put this all together. And I will say that palliative care is really the only field of medicine that truly is focused on a team-based approach to care, where everybody works together, whether it's the case manager, like I said, the social worker, the nurse, the doctor, to support people.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating. Once again, having walked through some of this myself recently. And I remember, once again, my father-in-law was very, very direct about what he'd wanted. And one of the doctors in the hospital just was fighting us. And we knew what he wanted. And we also knew that he was 91 years old. He had a terminal brain tumor. We knew that we weren't going to fix this, and this particular doctor almost, we felt like he was looking at us like we were trying to rush our father out of life, which was not we were trying to honor what his wishes were, because he was so adamant about his wishes. And I thought it was interesting. This doctor took the tact that he was going to make us all feel guilty, to the point where we actually asked for a different doctor, because we were not trying to rush our father out to the other side. We were trying to honor his wishes because he was so specific about it. But it was interesting during the film as the family members, tried to wrap their arms around it. And even as the individual that was towards the end of life, as they're wrapping their head around it and watching their loved ones, in some cases, I'm thinking of the one woman and the husband and the wife scenario. And y'all definitely have to watch this movie and share it. But there's a lot of things going on, a lot of moving parts in these scenarios. And I think dignity, giving people dignity and honoring their wishes. And I don't think anything's more important. And with there are 72 million baby boomers. If you look at it in the United States, there are baby boomers all over the world, but there's 72 million, and the youngest ones are 54, and we were 78 million. So many of us have already passed over. So this is very real in many aging societies, and most countries are aging quickly. And so we've got to wrap our arms around it. Where did the palliative care movement come from, Shoshana? I'm just curious if you know a little bit of the history of it. I'm not. I don't know much about it.
Sure, it's actually a relatively new medical specialty. So it's only, I believe, been a board certified specialty for about 10 years. Of course, people have been dying since the beginning of time, right? So we've always found a way to care for folks at the end of life, but specifically palliative care, the way I understand it, was born out of a reaction to the fact that medical technology, which in many ways is wonderful that we have it, it's so advanced, but that everybody was having an end of life that was highly medicalized. And so folks who maybe weren't in line with that said, hey, I think there's another way to do this. What if we ask the patient and the family what's most important to them? And then we tailor care based on the answers to that question. And so palliative care has really become the place where we're truly focused on that. And again, it's bringing nurses and doctors and social workers and chaplains and case managers, because all of these elements are part of care. And I think getting back to what you said about baby boomers, I think that the way we're dying in the United States today is actually a public health crisis.
I agree.
It's also a financial and a civic crisis. Yep. Right now, over 10,000 people turn 65 every day in this country. And it turns out that people over 65 need an average of 4 years of caregiving during the remainder of their lives. So to provide that care, whether it's keeping the person clean and fed, bathed, nurtured, in other words, the day-to-day stuff that's about being human beyond the medical stuff, is extraordinarily expensive. Financially and emotionally, right? Yes. And I think this generation of baby boomers now more than ever values autonomy, choice, independence. And at Endwell, the work we're doing through the media platform and the symposium, we really believe that the time is now to start engaging in these conversations about what matters most, the things that you're talking about, to really collectively listen and learn from each other, with the goal of creating, a cultural shift that supports new collaborations, breaks down silos, thinking about new systems, new products, and one that, fosters new and, existing networks of support for people to make the end of life more human-centered for everybody.
Yeah, there's nothing more important. And the baby boomers, I believe, and I'm starting to write about this, but I believe a lot of the baby boomers are awakening. And when I say that, the reason why I use those terms is because I think, when the baby boomers, first came of age, they were burning their bras and they were fighting for their rights, and, that we're going to stop this Vietnam War and all those times. And then everybody got busy, raising kids and having jobs and all the things that we do in life. And now that a lot of us are, becoming older, and refinding our wisdom, I think a lot of awakening is happening with the baby boomers. And every step of their lives, they have completely changed all the rules and done things differently. And I think this is an example of another thing that needs to be fixed. We need to live our lives with dignity. We need to be able to die with dignity. We need to stop assuming because someone has a terminal illness that they can no longer contribute to the world or add any value. That's ridiculous. We've seen some of the most beautiful work come out of end of life. And I think we need to embrace the humanness of who we are. Let me ask you a question, because I know I don't want to keep you longer since we had technical problems at the beginning, but what do you wish that, for the film, and what can we do to support what you're doing? I'm all in, Shoshana. I want to help. I want to turn up the volume. I really believe in the work, but what can the audience do to help you? Tell us how we can help.
Thank you. I think that there is a growing social movement around this topic. We're seeing a willingness of people to really engage in these hard conversations that are honestly about living, right?
Right.
Not about
Right.
dying. And I think that now people are realizing that their voice matters. And I believe the biggest shift in healthcare and care otherwise is going to come from consumers, patients, families demanding better of our system. And I think on the policy side, the challenge with making policy change, which is critical to the conversation, is that you have to have leaders that care about the issues.
I agree.
Okay? And I think that there are some that do, but I think that actually comes from us, the people, asking for something different, something better. And I have to believe that while we have a huge task ahead of us, it all starts with having a conversation with the people that you love about what matters most to you. And what I'll say is, a book like Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, who's a friend and colleague, is such a great way to connect, or watching one of our films, of course. But I love the questions that he brings up. And I actually think that if people can first start with personal reflection on these questions and then talk with the people they love, I think it would have a huge impact. And these are, what are your priorities if time becomes short? What are you willing to sacrifice? And what are you not willing to sacrifice? And what does a good day look like for you? And I think the final question is really, what do you want your life for? And so connecting with these, in a real way and talking about them is, if everyone out there did that, gosh, we'd be so much further along in this.
I agree. Before we let you go, tell us once again how we can get a hold of you, how we can learn. I mean, once again, The End Game is on Netflix. Highly recommend it. What else, how else can we track you?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at ShoshUMD. I have a personal website, ShoshanaUngerleider.com. If you can't spell that, visit the endwellproject.org website, and you can connect with some of our content and learn about the symposium on December 6th in San Francisco. And pretty much every other social media modality, if you type in either Endwell or Shoshana Ungerleider, you'll find us. And please reach out. We want to hear from you.
Right. And I'll make sure that we send all of these links. We'll put them out on Facebook, and we'll put them out on all of our marketing and on our website too. We want you to see this movie. We want you to join this movement. Shoshana, thank you for honoring us. We really appreciate your work. You're changing the world. Bless you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Thanks, everybody. Sorry for the technical problems.